A Course in Miracles. Lesson 150. My mind holds only what I think with God. Reviewing Lesson 139. I will accept atonement for myself. Reviewing Lesson 140. Only salvation can be said to cure. You think atonement means payment, but what if there was no debt? A bill slides under the door one morning. It looks official. Red letters across the top. Final notice. Past due. Immediate action required. The man picks it up and feels his stomach tighten before he even reads the details. That is how the ego trains the mind. First fear, then interpretation. First contraction, then obedience. He opens the envelope. The amount owed is impossible. One lifetime of guilt. Payable through suffering, sacrifice, self-improvement, apology, illness, aging, fear, regret, and death. The creditor listed at the top is God. The charge reads separation. And without questioning the bill, the man begins arranging his life around payment. That is the condition of the sleeping mind. It does not first ask whether the debt is real. It asks how much is due. It asks how long it will take. It asks what kind of payment God will accept. It asks whether pain counts. It asks whether guilt counts. It asks whether sickness counts. It asks whether being a good person counts. It asks whether religious devotion counts. It asks whether enough suffering might finally balance the account. But something happened before all of that. Before payment, there was agreement. Before guilt, there was belief. Before suffering, there was authentication. Before the collector had power, the mind treated the invoice like evidence. That is the part the ego hopes no one notices. The ego does not need the bill to be true. It only needs the mind to react as if it is true. The collector knocks, and the mind answers. The accusation appears, and the mind signs for it. The invoice arrives, and the mind calls it mine. That is participation, not sin, not crime, not actual separation. Participation is the instant the mind forgets to ask who sent the bill. The ego never collected a debt. It collected agreement. That is the hook. That is the trick. That is the little place where the sleeping Son of God disappears into the story and calls the story reality. The bill says God is the creditor, and the mind does not laugh. That is where the dream gets power. The bill says separation happened, and the mind does not question the charge. That is where guilt enters. The bill says payment is required, and the mind reaches for the wallet. That is where time begins to look useful, because if there is a debt, there must be a payment plan. If there is a payment plan, there must be time. If there is time, salvation must be later. And if salvation is later, God must be missing now. That is the whole scam. A Course in Miracles enters this scene with a correction so radical, the ego cannot survive it. The bill is fake. There is no debt. Not because God reviewed the case and decided to be merciful. Not because heaven lowered the balance. Not because the separated self finally paid enough. Not because pain became spiritually impressive. Not because sacrifice softened God's heart. There is no debt because the transaction never happened. The separation never occurred. The tiny, mad idea produced no real effects. Nothing was stolen from God. Nothing was taken from love. Nothing was damaged in heaven. Nothing happened to innocence.
This is what it means to accept atonement for oneself. The ego hears the word atonement and immediately thinks payment, repair, restitution, making up for wrongdoing. A broken relationship must be fixed. A debt must be satisfied. Someone must apologize. Someone must bleed. Someone must earn the way back. But that is the world's definition. That is the collector's definition. That is the invoice talking. A Course in Miracles does not use atonement that way. Atonement is not the payment of guilt. Atonement is the undoing of guilt. It is not the repair of separation. It is the recognition that separation never happened. That distinction changes everything. Because as long as atonement is understood as payment, the ego remains intact. There is still a sinner. There is still a crime. There is still a past. There is still a wounded God. There is still a separate self attempting to make itself acceptable. The ego loves that version.
It will let the self be religious. It will let the self be spiritual. It will let the self be humble. It will let the self confess, cry, fast, pray, work, improve, and apologize. As long as the debt remains real, the debtor remains real too. That is the secret contract. The ego does not care whether the identity is proud or ashamed. It only cares that the identity remains. A guilty self is still a self. A healing self is still a self. A spiritual self is still a self. A self trying to pay God back is still a self. So the man sits at the table with the invoice in front of him. He has lived this way for years. Every morning, another notice. Every night, another calculation. Did I suffer enough today? Did I apologize enough today? Did I improve enough today? Did I fear enough today? Did I punish myself enough today? Did I prove to God that I know I was wrong? And every question assumes the debt. Every question bows to the bill. Every question says the collector has authority. Then lesson 150 speaks like a clean blade through the room. My mind holds only what I think with God. If the mind holds only what it thinks with God, then guilt is not in the mind. Fear is not in the mind. Separation is not in the mind. Sin is not in the mind. The past is not in the mind. The debt is not in the mind. Those things can seem to appear, but they are not thoughts in the Course's deepest sense. They are images, echoes, static, fear pretending to think. A thought of God is real because it is shared with reality. A thought of fear is not real because fear has no source in God. So the wrong thoughts are not thoughts. They are not thoughts of God. They are not thoughts the mind truly holds. They are not entries in heaven's ledger. They are the scribbles of a fake collector who learned how to use official language. This is why the first correction is not behavior. It is not payment. It is not performance. It is not becoming better inside the dream. The first correction is looking. The man looks at the bill, really looks, not with panic, not with obedience, not with the old automatic agreement. He looks and asks the question the ego never wanted asked. Where is the original debt? Not the feeling of debt, not the fear of debt, not the inherited teaching about debt, not the religious language around debt, not the emotional pressure to pay debt. Where is the actual debt? Where did separation truly occur? Where did love actually lose something? Where did God become incomplete? Where did innocence become stained? Where did the Son of God leave heaven? The answer is silence. Not because the answer is hidden, because the debt has no witness. The ego can produce documents, but not truth. It can produce memories, but not reality. It can produce symptoms, but not cause. It can produce fear, but not fact. And this is why only salvation can be said to cure. The world tries to cure the anxiety of debt while preserving the belief that the debt is real. It offers better payment plans. It says, breathe through the bill, pray over the bill, understand the bill, reframe the bill, decorate the bill, build an identity around surviving the bill. But none of that cancels the false account. Therapy may help the debtor feel less ashamed. Religion may teach the debtor how to kneel while paying. Self-improvement may teach the debtor how to become a more disciplined payer. Medicine may soothe the body that carries the stress of the imagined account. Relationships may distract the debtor with temporary affection. Success may give the debtor nicer furniture in the collection office. But only salvation cures, because only salvation questions the premise. Salvation does not ask how to pay this. Salvation asks, who said anything was owed? That is why the cure is not in time. Time is part of the payment plan. The ego says salvation will come later. Later keeps the invoice active. Later says the debt still exists today. Later says the account is open. Later says heaven has gaps. Later says God is not fully now. But salvation is not a future reward. It is present recognition. The mind does not need to move toward truth. It needs to stop defending the lie that it moved away. Atonement is not a journey back to God. It is the end of pretending there was distance. That is why the ego experiences atonement as terrifying. It is not really afraid of punishment. Punishment keeps the criminal real. Punishment keeps the court open. Punishment keeps the story alive. Punishment keeps the self located in a past that heaven never saw. What the ego fears is cancellation. Atonement does not improve the criminal. It ends the criminal. It does not pardon a real crime. It reveals that no crime occurred. The ego would rather be guilty than non-existent. It would rather pay forever than admit there was no debtor. So the collector returns. Another envelope under the door. Another notice. Another accusation. Another reminder that payment is due. But this time the man does not panic. He does not reach for his wallet. He does not negotiate. He does not call the number at the bottom. He does not try to prove he is a better debtor now. He simply looks, and the entire machine begins to lose force. The red letters are still printed, but they no longer command him. The threats are still there, but they no longer define him. The amount is still listed, but it no longer frightens him. Because the power was never in the bill. The power was in the belief. The collector had no authority until the mind handed it over. The accusation had no weight until the mind called it mine. The debt had no meaning until the mind participated in the lie. And now the participation is withdrawn. Not dramatically, not violently, not proudly. Quietly, clearly, soberly. The mind stops paying what was never owed. This is lesson 150 in one image. The Son of God holding a fake invoice from the ego and finally realizing heaven never sent it. No debt, no payment, no separation,
No wound in God. No stain on innocence. No distance from love. Only the mind remembering what it has always held. The thoughts it thinks with God. And everything else was never a bill from heaven. It was never a thought in truth. It was never a debt. It was paper from a collector with no authority. And the moment the mind stops signing for it, the whole account disappears.